Fences from Neighbourly in A Bekkersdal Marathon by Herman Bosman. Anyway, so there was a fence going to come there now, along the edge of the Mariku, through the bush, barbed wire, a metal thread strung along the border, sprouting at intervals, as befitted a bushveld tendril, thorns. "A fence now," Herman said. Whenever I think of a fence, I also call to mind a kindly neighbour, standing on the other side of it, shaking his head and smiling in a brotherly love sort of way at what he sees going on my side of the fence. And all the time I'm just about boiling at the advice he's giving me on how to do it better. Like when I was building my new house once, that was to provide shelter for my wife and children. And a neighbour came and stood on the other side of the fence, shaking his head at the sun-dried bricks in a kind-hearted manner. Turf clay was no good for sun-dried bricks, he told me, seeing that the walls of that kind of stable would collapse with the first rains. And I didn't have the strength of mind to tell him the truth. I mean, I was too ashamed to let him know that I had really meant those bricks for my house. So I just built another stable instead, which I didn't need. And it was only a long time afterwards, through a good piece of the mud that he had smeared it up with in front, crumbling away, that I found out that my neighbour's own house, which he had always talked about in such fashionable language, was built of nothing more than turf clay bricks, sun-dried. "Yes," Stein said, "or when you were putting up a prill for a grapevine to trail over." "And then that neighbour comes along and says, 'What a shaky prill like that? It'll never hold up a grapevine,'" Stein continued. "And then you say, 'Well, it's not meant for grapes, see?' You're not that kind of a fool, you say. You're only making a trellis for the wife. She wants to grow a creeper with those feathery kind of leaves on it, you say. And then your neighbour says, well, he hopes they aren't very heavy feathers, because it won't take much weight on it to bring the whole thing down. By that time, you feel about like a brown weevil crawling over one of the side shoots of the grapevine you intended to plant there. And it's a funny thing, but you never really take to the blue flowers of the creeper that you put there instead. It was significant, we said, how you would, on occasion, come across a stable that looked far too good for just an ordinary bushveld farm, with squares and triangles cut out in the plaster above the door of the stable, and with a stoop that, if you didn't know it was a stable, why, you could almost picture people sitting, drinking coffee on it. And spidery threads of creepers twining delicately, if somewhat incongruously, about solid scaffoldings with tarred uprights. Looking as though why the farmer made the pergola so sturdy was so that the pale gossamer blooms shouldn't just float away. And it would all be because of the advice of a neighbour who at one time stood on the other side of the fence, kind-hearted, but with his eyes narrowed, almost as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And his one hand would be resting easily on the wire, as if at any instant he could jump clear over and come and take what you were busy with right away from you and show you how it should be done. His other hand would be up to his forehead so that he could see better, and he would be shaking his head in a kindly fashion in between making recommendations. That was what a fence represented to us, we said. Young Vermaak, the schoolmaster, made a remark then. This was the first chance he had had thus far to talk. As far as he could see, the schoolmaster said, the effect it was going to have, erecting a fence between the Union and Bechuanaland Protectorate, was that it was going to make the Union and the Protectorate really neighbourly.